Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. I'm so excited to talk to Eliza Van Reen today. She is a PhD, a doctor, and an expert in circadian rhythms and sleep. So stay tuned to learn more about what are circadian rhythms really, what does good sleep hygiene look like, and why we might want to be like babies in our sleep routines.
So my name, as you said, is Eliza Van Reen, and I'm a sleep and circadian rhythms expert. I'm now CEO and founder of a company called Circadian Positioning Systems, and we develop technology that helps to enhance circadian rhythm alignment, which I'll tell you what that is a little bit later, sleep and performance when you're supposed to be performing. And I started out as an academic, so that's how I am a sleep and circadian rhythms expert. I received my Ph.D. from Brigham University, and my focus was on sleep and circadian rhythms for my dissertation. And then I did my postdoc at Harvard Medical School and focused on, again, sleep and circadian rhythms and also light. I did a lot of studies on how light affects sleep, circadian rhythm, performance, mood, and so forth. And then circled back and was faculty at Brown Medical School and deputy director of the sleep lab there, and ended up kind of working on some of the beginnings of this technology and decided to leave my academic position and focus on trying to bring sleep and circadian rhythm technology that's really data backed and science based, that we know can help folks improve their sleep, their circadian rhythm alignment, their alertness and performance during the day. And that's kind of how I ended up CEO of Circadian Positioning Systems.
That's awesome. Great. Well, I know you know a lot, obviously, about circadian rhythms. And I feel like we read about or see videos on YouTube about circadian rhythms. But if you were explaining circadian rhythms to the everyday person, how would you describe what they are and what they do in our bodies and our brains?
Yeah, so circadian rhythms, and I'm glad you asked this question because I think there's a lot of confusion, like what they actually are. So circadian rhythms are these physiological processes. Basically, they occur about a day, so every 24 hours, and it essentially helps the body to do things at certain times of day. So at certain times of day, these rhythms may be helping you to sleep well, or they may be helping you to maintain alertness, or they may be involved in digestion or metabolism or multiple other physiological processes. So they're internal to your body, these processes, and it's just really these rhythms that kind of help you stay aligned to your bodies to stay aligned to the external environment. And what happens sometimes when I mentioned circadian misalignment before is your internal biology and these internal rhythms that you have become misaligned with your external work environment. So this happens when we travel and we experience jet lag. So all of a sudden it's harder to sleep when you're supposed to be sleeping in the new place, or when you're a shift worker and it becomes hard to sleep at certain times of day when it's your only opportunity to sleep. So we want to keep these circadian rhythms aligned, these internal rhythms aligned with your external environment.
And what makes them misaligned? Like, if you were to explain, why does jet lag happen, or why do shift workers have a hard time sleeping? What's going on where your internal rhythms are not aligned with your external environment?
There can be a number of things that cause this misalignment, but one big one that's involved with jet lag and with shift work and so forth is, and this is where one of the confusions happens with what circadian rhythms are and what they're not. So the solar light dark cycle is very important and has been since the beginning of humankind for aligning these circadian rhythms. So your internal circadian rhythms rely heavily on the light dark cycle to tell you what time of day it is. There are some experiments done early on in animals that really demonstrated why it's so important to have circadian rhythms. So these animals, unfortunately, had no circadian rhythms. and were coming out at night when they weren't supposed to be, and being immediately kind of preyed upon, I guess is the best. So we don't need to worry about that so much as humans anymore. But it's just it was a very, I guess, good example for me why these rhythms exist in multiple different organisms. So the light dark cycle, getting back to that, can really impact heavily your circadian rhythms. And sunrise and sunset really used to tell you the day's beginning and the day's end. And when you fly and you rapidly change across time zones, that gets messed up. Your body, your brain can't process the new light dark information that quickly. And that kind of is responsible for jet lag. Similar things happen with shift work. So the light dark cues are very important regarding kind of the circadian misalignment. But then there's also kind of social factors that factor in too. So people choose to stay up sometimes with the lights on. They choose to extend their kind of day by keeping artificial lights on and so forth, and choosing to kind of work all night or stay up all night watching TV or whatever they choose to stay up and do.
Really?
So there's a lot of, I guess, behavioral lifestyle choices that can kind of work into creating these circadian misalignment sleep issues that we see.
Okay. I definitely want to get back to that and talk more about light and dark as well. But one last question on circadian rhythms. You sort of mentioned, there's a lot of misconceptions about circadian rhythms. What are maybe one or two of the top misconceptions that you see or hear about circadian rhythms?
I think people kind of, this is more of a science, I guess, answer a little bit. But it's very important to understand that when we're talking about circadian rhythms, we're talking about internal rhythms to the organism. And they get confused a lot with the solar light dark cycle, especially in products that are on the market, where your internal rhythms are kind of innate to the organism that has these rhythms. And then you're being affected by the solar light dark cycle or your artificial lighting in your house. And I think that's really key to developing a product that actually works, is that you understand the difference between internal and external. And that's just like a very key fact. And then the second one is kind of related, where I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about sleep being circadian rhythms. And your sleep cycle is an example in most people of a circadian rhythm. So a lot of people sleep once a day, and they sleep at a certain time of day when it's easiest for them to sleep. Not everyone, of course. So there is a circadian rhythm to your sleep-wake cycle, but it's not a circadian. It isn't circadian rhythms, if that makes any sense.
So in other words, I think often when we're on social media or something like that, we'll see graphics or information that equate the two, that circadian rhythm equals sleep, or sleep is circadian rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, circadian rhythms are internal rhythms to our bodies or animals' bodies that regulate different behaviors: sleep, wakefulness, eating, those kinds of things.
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly right. So, and even kind of hormone release and stuff. So there's kind of behaviors that are manifested that have a circadian rhythm to them. And then there are physiological processes that have a circadian rhythm to them. Mm-hmm. So the secretion of melatonin, for example, has a circadian rhythm to it. So yes, exactly. You summed it up very well. So.
About the role of light and dark, and in some way, it's both maybe simple, right, in terms of making it dark or making it light, but also difficult because we're constantly looking at screens which emit light, or we've got artificial lights in our house and maybe it's hard to turn those off and be in darkness and signal it's time to rest. So again, just for people who maybe don't know a lot about the science, what's the role of light and what's the role of dark in being awake and being asleep?
Yeah, so light is important in a direct way, in an indirect way. You can tell me if I'm being too sciencey. But humans have really evolved to light signals wakefulness and so forth. So there's actually direct alerting effects of light, especially if it's bright enough and has certain kind of characteristics to the light. So it will actually help with alertness just having bright light around. The indirect effects are, there's one example is how it affects circadian rhythms. So receiving light at the same time of day every day, if you're someone that wants to wake up at 6 in the morning, so receiving light in the morning when you wake up, bright light and so forth, and being consistent about that, and then making sure that lights are kind of trending downwards before bed for at least an hour before bed would be my recommendation. That really gives a strong, crisp signal to the circadian system that differentiating day from night. And that helps. And I think kind of these strong signals help in a variety of different human physiology and human behavior. But you're really trying to show your brain that there's a difference between day and night. And when you don't show your brain that, it's hard for your brain to kind of process there's a difference between day and night. And then that's when we end up having these issues with not being able to go to sleep. It's one of the reasons we can have these issues with having trouble falling asleep or maintaining sleep, or feeling tired during the day and so forth.
Well, that's also a good question. A lot of us struggle with getting a good night's sleep, whether it's falling asleep in a timely manner at night or getting up in the middle of the night and then being able to fall back asleep. And then, as you mentioned, if you're a shift worker, it may just be tough to get sleep in general.
Right.
With regards to light and dark, what are one or two things you would recommend people do if they are having trouble sleeping?
Yeah. So I guess before we go into tips, there is always the possibility someone has an actual sleep disorder.
Sure.
So they should kind of be aware that there are sleep disorders, and that if you are suspecting you have an actual sleep disorder, you should see a physician who specializes in sleep. But if it is more of a behavioral kind of, not an actual medical disorder, I think being consistent, like we do for babies and our children, to kind of like teach them night from day. Adults, I feel, get less good at doing that for themselves. So keeping a consistent, it's called sleep hygiene in our field, keeping a consistent wake time and bedtime, and keeping the lighting consistent with that as well. So once you're up in the morning, bright light, you turn the lights on, you open the blinds, and you really kind of get going with the light right in the morning. And then sleeping in the dark, like kind of having the light taper off at night, and not keeping it super, super bright right up till when you go to bed. And then having it dark in your room at night or wherever you're sleeping is really important.
Got it. And that's what your company is doing, right? I think you're designing technology and an app that helps people turn on the lights and have them the right brightness, and dim the lights and turn them off at the right times. Can you explain more about the science behind that and what you're doing?
Yeah. So before we had artificial lighting, the kind of sunsets and sunrises were very predictable. So day length was predictable. It does, obviously, day length varies regarding where you live on Earth. But day length and night were very kind of predictable things that occurred. And it was relatively dark. Even with a full moon, it was still relatively dark at night. So there's like this component to all of this stuff that really, before artificial lighting, our brain was really well adapted to what was going on in the natural environment. And as artificial lighting has come along and other kind of demands, societal demands and work and so forth, we've really moved away from that. And that's created a lot of the issues that we see today with people kind of changing their day lengths without realizing the ramifications of changing the day length. Because we can't entrain. So we're entrained to this 24-hour light dark cycle, and you can't entrain to super short day lengths or super long day lengths. Like your brain can't actually do it. It's not possible for your brain to do it. So some people are repeatedly doing this to themselves every day without realizing it, like changing the day length or the night length to just levels that we can't actually entrain to, if that makes any sense. So
they're keeping bright lights on for 18 hours or 20 hours a day.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Their brain and their circadian rhythms are fighting that and saying, no, wait, this is not what we're supposed to be doing right now.
Yeah, or in some environments, the light isn't sufficient. It's way too dim in certain environments, and some folks get way too little outdoor light exposure too. And in the laboratory, in a science setting, you would actually keep the light that dim to desynchronize people. They're called forced desynchrony protocols. So it would be to actually measure their internal clock and pull the environmental information out. So it's actually a protocol you'd use to like cause that misalignment almost so you can measure it. And some people in some jobs and in some situations are actually kind of doing that to themselves. So they're creating issues for themselves that you'd see in people that are in studies or people that are blind sometimes that actually don't have like functioning circadian photoreceptors. And I think that people don't realize that's happening to them sometimes.
Okay, this is fascinating because I haven't actually heard about this. So you're saying some people might not have bright enough light.
Yes, definitely.
For a long enough time. Maybe they like to work in a dark cave of a room in their home office. They're in front of a computer, but they don't have sunlight, or they're not getting outside, or they just don't have lights on in the room.
Yeah.
And that's also throwing off their rhythms.
Definitely. Yep. 100%. Like that.
And would that make them, if you aren't getting enough light during the day, would that make you sleepier or less awake during the day? Or would it make it harder for you to go to sleep at night, or both?
It can definitely be both. And it kind of depends on what your body gets used to a certain extent, or what your exposure is day to day. But yeah, kind of if you're just in a very dark place and not really keeping a schedule, it becomes very problematic. Like your circadian rhythms will like move away from environmental like cues and so forth. And you can kind of, I've had experience with some people that are kind of night owls, and it just kind of keeps going, and then they start complaining about how they're not up at the same time as anyone else. And you can kind of see it in some people kind of fall into this. Then there's these social issues that they have where everyone's asleep when they're up, and they're asleep when everyone else is up. And again, I feel the need to remind people that some of these things could actually be circadian rhythm, medical disorders. But sometimes it really is just this slippery slope of
lifestyle habits.
Yes.
The habits you've made, and then it starts to build on itself.
Exactly.
Okay. So it goes back to what you were saying, your two top tips for if you definitely don't have a diagnosed medical condition around sleep, but you just find it hard to fall asleep or get good sleep, look at your light. Are you having enough bright light during the day?
Yep.
And then are you dimming your lights before bedtime and then sleeping in a dark environment?
Yep. And I would also too, just like to add to that tip too, is like a consistency between, because if you stay up on the weekends until 3 a.m, and then Monday you need to be up at 6 to get to work, you're gonna have trouble falling asleep, and you're gonna have trouble staying asleep. Sometimes you're gonna feel tired during the day and all of that kind of stuff. So keeping as a consistent bedtime and wake time as you can is really important. And that's one of the same reasons that people like the jet lag stuff. So if you're flying to different time zones all the time, that can kind of cause issues for people.
Yeah. that you do during the day that either help you sleep at night or maybe don't help you sleep at night. Can you talk about that?
Definitely. Yeah, that's key. So there's things you can do during the day, just like you said, that can set you up for a good night's sleep or really sabotage a good night's sleep. So we've already talked a lot about the light. So getting bright light during the day and then kind of fading the light out right before sleep is really important. But there's things such as caffeine. So having caffeine too close to sleep can really sabotage your sleep. Drinking alcohol, especially too much alcohol, can really sabotage your sleep. And you were mentioning a little bit earlier, people waking up in the middle of the night. That's a culprit for sure of kind of disrupting sleep and waking you up kind of prematurely and struggling to get back to sleep.
How about naps? Yeah, what about naps?
Yeah, naps can be good for sure, but the timing of naps is critical. So if you take a nap too close to when you want to go to sleep, it's going to be very hard for you to fall asleep. So in kind of the science of sleep, as soon as you wake up, sleep pressure kind of starts building, and you need to mount enough sleep pressure to be able to go back to sleep. And when you sleep, it dissipates that sleep pressure. So if your sleep pressure is building, you take a 3-hour nap and dissipate that sleep pressure. You need to rebuild that sleep pressure up to be able to go to sleep. So if you take a nap, you want to take a nap that ends. So you're up completely 4 hours before you try to go back to bed or more. Like the more the better, really. And there's individual differences in that, so you might need to kind of dial that in for yourself. But naps can be great as long as they're timed correctly.
Okay, so nap can be good, but make sure that you wake up from your nap at least 4 hours, if not more, before you want to go to bed for the night.
Yeah, and I hate to keep going back to the kind of baby thing, but this happens with babies. If you put a baby down for a nap and wake them up and then try to put them down for the night an hour later, you're like, oh, like what? Like, why are they not going to sleep? Like, I don't, and it's that same process. So a lot of this is kind of basic. You would need to be extremely sleep deprived to be able to kind of fall right back to sleep after an hour.
How about caffeine? Because I've got to admit, I love my morning coffee. There is something so comforting about the smell of a fresh pot of coffee. How soon or long before bedtime would you say stop drinking coffee?
We're saying this might be a little bit more strict than some other people, but we would ask people to stop drinking caffeine after noon to kind of make sure that, because people metabolize caffeine differently and so forth. So again, this always goes back to kind of, you know yourself best. If you have your last coffee of the day at 1 and have absolutely no sleep troubles, then fine. But there's also people, myself, I really cannot drink coffee. I drink 1 in the morning and that's it, because I will be one of those people that's kind of like tired and wired. Like it doesn't help me at a certain point, but it will keep me up.
I've changed even over time. So I used to be able to drink a couple cups of coffee in the morning and then a couple cups after lunch, which I liked that sensation of a warm beverage after lunch, and I'd sleep just fine. And then in the last year or two, I noticed I was having a harder time falling asleep at night when I had that afternoon post-lunch coffee. So I stopped that, even though that was hard, and now I only drink it in the morning. And to your point, I stopped drinking it at noon. I can fall asleep at night so much easier now.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's hidden caffeine and stuff sometimes too that you've got to keep your eye on. So some sodas that you wouldn't expect it would have caffeine, like orange sodas and stuff. Not that soda is necessarily what everybody is drinking, but their chocolate has caffeine. So you've got to, there's sometimes some sparkling waters now have caffeine infused. Oh, wow. So you've really got to pay attention sometimes to kind of, because you might be ingesting caffeine that you don't even know you're ingesting.
Let's go back to sleep hygiene. you were mentioning before that you should use the bed for sleeping. So
Yes.
sleep in it, but don't check your last work emails on your phone. Don't watch a movie on your iPad in the bed all day long either. We've also talked about light. So as soon as light hits your eyes, it starts to make you more alert. A lot of people keep their phone in the bedroom because they use it for an alarm. What are your thoughts on, you get up in the middle of the night, check your phone. What's happening to you, and why might that make it harder to go back to sleep?
Yeah, that is multifaceted probably. So it depends. The light, how long you kind of are exposed to that light matters a lot. But you always risk by checking your emails that something like prompts your attention, and then you're sucked in, and now you're getting this light exposure, but your brain's also kind of moving. And I'm sure to a certain extent, it depends on your personality. If you're the kind of person that's like, oh, whatever, I'll deal with it in the morning, you probably wouldn't be checking your phone in the middle of the night anyway. But sometimes I think people get sucked into having to respond right away. And then that kind of your brain's going, and you've kind of created this arousal response in yourself that, again, you have to kind of like, some people more than others, like decompress from. So it's kind of just like the bedtime routine that we were talking about. You wouldn't probably try to look at a bunch of stressful emails like right before bed. And you're just risking that you're going to be kind of exposing yourself to something that's going to be overly stimulating in the middle of the night, which is just, in my opinion, not necessary. You can deal with it in the morning. You'll respond much better after a good night's sleep to whatever kind of email you received. So my recommendation would be to kind of sleep, and then you respond in the morning to stuff, and really train yourself. And that's going to be hard to break that habit for some people that are used to kind of rolling over and kind of checking their emails in the middle of the night.
Yeah,
and teenagers are doing this too with social media and all of that kind of stuff. And it really is extremely disruptive to sleep. And if you think about one night's sleep that gets disrupted, and you have a bad next day. But when this becomes chronic, now we're talking about multiple kind of a chronic issue. And usually you don't want to have a chronic issue of any sort. So it really is kind of, I guess kind of like bigger picture, higher level picture, how you're treating your sleep and your sleep hygiene, and kind of trying to manage that in a better way, because sleep is fundamentally connected to health.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's why whenever somebody asks me, what's your top self-care tip? I say sleep. Getting enough sleep and getting quality sleep is important. With the cell phones, my partner and I started plugging them in on the opposite end of the house from our bedrooms, so that we weren't tempted to look at them in the middle of the night. And then we got old-fashioned battery-operated alarm clocks.
Yep.
Just cheap alarm clocks we found online. You press buttons to set the alarm, and that way we don't even have a reason to have the phone in the bedroom, which is really nice.
Yeah, exactly. And I've heard of a lot of people kind of moving towards that too. And same thing with your laptops, even though those are kind of TVs, just like you're saying, like kind of people falling asleep and then it wakes you up. And it's just that stuff would be kind of considered poor sleep hygiene to be having that stuff in bed. And the other thing, sorry, to circle back to, some people start suffering, especially kind of across age, eating too close to sleep can also kind of be problematic. So it's kind of just having a routine, like a well-timed routine during the day can really help your sleep at night.
Yeah, I'm definitely feeling the eating too close to sleep one. The other night we went and saw a concert, and then we had a dinner late afterward. And my partner and I both had a tough time sleeping well through the night, which we normally don't, because we ate that dinner, at 10 o'clock at night, which is not what we normally do.
Yeah.
So you talked about, as part of sleep hygiene or protecting your sleep, sleeping in an environment that is dark, cool, and comfortable. Not everybody has or can afford to get blackout shades, or maybe have a completely dark room. I live in Chicago, and there is an alley light that shines right into my bedroom. Right?
Yeah.
There's nothing I can do about that. So, what about we obviously have at Asutra a blackout sleep mask. It's a silk sleep mask. It's filled with lavender and flax seeds, and when you have it on, it really does block out the light. What do you
Yep.
think about tools like that, like a sleep mask for darkness?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, those are excellent tools. We at Brown, when I was running studies before people would come into the lab, because we really wanted to control their light dark cycle, and you did have people, kids. We ran a lot of kids too with varying abilities to control their own light dark cycle, and masks were mandatory. So we sent masks to kind of put over at night. They had the mask on to you could kind of more ensure the dark environment and that way. And then the lighting, of course, in the lab is well controlled and so forth. So yeah, masks are a great idea. And some of my colleagues who kind of help with sleep in the Department of Defense, they've kind of recommend and use masks in that population too, where you're sharing an environment with people that may be kind of turning lights on and off at different levels. So yeah, if you lack control over your environment, masks are definitely a great way to kind of block light out and get you a dark sleeping environment.